The Counterfeit Bride. The train whistle pierced the morning air as it rumbled across the Colorado plains, the thundering wheels drowning out the soft, desperate sobs of Elisha Prescott. She pressed a handkerchief to her lips, trying to contain her grief while staring at the still form lying across from her. Savannah Elliott looked peaceful now, the racking cough that had plagued her throughout their journey finally silenced forever. The consumption had taken her during the night, leaving Elisha utterly alone in a world that had already turned its back on her. "Oh, Savannah," Elisha whispered, reaching to squeeze her friend's cold hand, but then pulled it back. "What am I to do now?" The train lurched, sending Elisha against the window. Outside, the Rocky Mountains loomed larger with each passing mile, their majestic peaks seeming to mock her predicament. 3 weeks ago, she had fled Boston in disgrace, her reputation in tatters after Frederick Harrington, her married employer, had attempted to force himself upon her in his library. When she'd fought him off, he'd claimed she'd been the seductress, and in Boston's high society, a wealthy man's word always outweighed that of a lady's companion. She'd taken the blame to protect her widowed mother, who still worked as the housekeeper in the Harrington home. If both Prescott women were dismissed, they would have nothing. Elisha had escaped with what little savings she possessed. She had chosen to travel with her dearest friend, Savannah, who was traveling west to marry a man she'd never met, and who owned a silver mine in a town called Eagle Ridge. Savannah had corresponded with him for months and carried all his letters in her trunk, along with her wedding dress. Her friend had promised to help her find a job in Eagle Ridge once they arrived. Now Savannah was gone, and Elisha was nearly penniless with nowhere to go. A knock at the private compartment door startled her. "Next stop, Eagle Ridge." 20 minutes, called the conductor. Elisha looked at Savannah's peaceful face, then at the leather satchel on the seat containing all of her friend's correspondence with her intended. A desperate idea began to form. "Forgive me, Savannah," she whispered, reaching for the satchel. Within a few minutes, she had read through the letters. The mine owner, Stanley Pierce, had never seen a photograph of Savannah. They had exchanged 6 months of correspondence, arranged through a mail-order bride service. Savannah had described herself only vaguely as having fair hair and blue eyes, features she and Elisha coincidentally shared. When the train pulled into Eagle Ridge Station, Elisha had made her decision. She would be Savannah Elliott at least until she could earn enough money to continue west to California. Then she would disappear, leaving a note explaining everything to the man who was expecting to marry Savannah the day after her arrival. It was dishonest and despicable, but she was desperate, and it would only be for a short while. She smoothed her travel-worn blue dress and pinched her pale cheeks for color. She had arranged for the local doctor to collect Savannah's body, telling him her dear friend had succumbed to consumption during their journey. She'd pay for a proper burial with what little money she had left. As the train hissed to a stop, Elisha gathered her courage along with Savannah's belongings. "It's just a few weeks," she promised herself. "Then I'll tell the truth and be on my way." The platform was busy with miners, merchants, and a few women in practical frontier dresses. Elisha scanned the crowd, wondering which man was Stanley Pierce. Savannah's letters described him as tall and reserved, mentioning an accident at his mine some years earlier that had left him changed, though she hadn't elaborated. "Miss Elliott?" Elisha turned toward the deep voice. The man before her stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and a sturdy build that spoke of physical labor despite his obvious wealth, evident in his fine black coat and crisp white shirt. His dark hair was neatly trimmed, and his clean-shaven jaw was square and strong. But what caught her attention was the left side of his face. There was a landscape of pink and white scars that pulled his mouth askew. The scarring continued down his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. "Mr. Pierce?" she asked, forcing herself not to stare. His expression guarded as he studied her face for her reaction to his appearance. When she smiled softly instead of recoiling, something in his green eyes shifted with what Elisha thought was relief. "Welcome to Eagle Ridge, Miss Elliott. I trust your journey was—" He paused, seeming to search for appropriate words. "It was long," she supplied, swallowing the lump in her throat. "And not without difficulties. I'm afraid I have some sad news. My traveling companion, Miss Elisha Prescott, passed away during our journey from consumption." The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she pushed forward. "I'm sorry to hear that," he said, his voice softening with genuine sympathy that made her guilt flare hotter. "The doctor has been informed. I'd like to arrange a proper burial, if possible." "Of course," Stanley said, offering his gloved hand for her carpet bag. "You must be exhausted. I've arranged lodging for you at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house until tomorrow's ceremony as propriety dictates." His formal manner matched his letters. He was polite and educated but reserved. As he guided her through the bustling mining town, Alicia noticed how people greeted him respectfully but kept their distance. Whether it was his scars or his position as the mine owner, she couldn't tell. Eagle Ridge was larger than she'd expected. It was a proper town with a main street lined with wooden buildings sporting false fronts. A general store, assay office, 2 saloons, a small church, and various other establishments created a bustling hub for the surrounding mines. "Your letters didn't mention the town was so developed?" Alicia remarked, genuinely impressed. Stanley glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "The Silver Lady Mine has been good to this community, though we're still lacking in certain civilized amenities. The nearest school is in Boulder City, which is 20 miles away." "That's a shame," Alicia replied truthfully. "Every child deserves an education." Something like approval flickered across his face before his professional mask returned. They stopped before a 2-story White House with blue trim and a neat garden. "Mrs. Sullivan is expecting you," he said, handing her the carpet bag. "I've taken the liberty of arranging for the dressmaker to visit you this afternoon, in case you need any adjustments to your, wedding attire." The hesitation in his voice revealed a hint of vulnerability that touched her. This man had sought a mail-order bride because his scars made him believe no local woman would have him, and she was deceiving him. "Thank you for your thoughtfulness, Mr. Pierce," she said, genuinely touched by his consideration. "The ceremony is scheduled for 11 tomorrow at the church, if that meets your approval." Alicia nodded, not trusting her voice. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Stanley Pierce under false pretenses, committing a fraud that could likely be punishable by law. As if sensing her unease, Stanley cleared his throat. "Miss Elliott, I want to assure you that despite our arrangement, I have no expectations beyond a mutually respectful partnership. Your comfort and happiness in Eagle Ridge are paramount." His formal words contained such sincerity that Alicia felt the sting of tears, but she blinked them away before they could be noticed. "Thank you. Until tomorrow, then, Mr. Pierce." He bowed and turned to leave, his tall figure cutting a solitary path down the street. Alicia watched him go with a feeling of guilt and a strange, unexpected flutter of something else. Something that had no place in her desperate scheme. The morning of what should have been the happiest day of Savannah Elliott's life dawned clear and bright over Eagle Ridge. Alicia stood before the small mirror in her room at Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house, hardly recognizing the woman who stared back at her. She wore Elizabeth's wedding dress, which was made out of ivory satin with delicate lace trim. Thankfully, the dress had required only minor adjustments. Her blonde hair was arranged in an elegant updo, adorned with tiny white flowers the dressmaker had brought. "You look absolutely lovely, dear," Mrs. Sullivan said from the doorway. The plump, gray-haired widow had taken Alicia under her wing immediately, chattering about how the town needed more refined ladies, and how pleased she was that Mr. Pierce has finally found himself a bride. "Thank you," Alicia replied, smoothing non-existent wrinkles from the dress. "It's such a shame about your friend passing," Mrs. Sullivan continued, "but she's resting peacefully in our little cemetery now, with Reverend Porter saying all the proper words yesterday." Alicia tried not to think about the fact that it was her name on the simple wooden cross, not Savannah's. The deception was already spiraling beyond her control. "Mr. Pierce is a good man," Mrs. Sullivan said, adjusting a flower in Elisha's hair. "He keeps to himself too much since the accident, but he's fair to his workers and generous to the town. That new clinic wouldn't be here without him." "The accident," Alicia echoed softly. "His face." Mrs. Sullivan's expression softened. "It happened 3 years ago. A dynamite blast went wrong in the main shaft. He saved 2 men going back into that inferno. Afterwards, he paid for the best doctors from Denver for those worse off than himself and refused treatment until it was too late." Alicia's heart constricted. The letters Savannah had received had mentioned a mining accident, but not his heroism. "It's time, dear," Mrs. Sullivan said, handing Alicia a small bouquet of white and silver wildflowers. "The whole town's turned out. Yours is the first wedding we've had in months." The church was indeed filled to capacity when Elisha entered on the arm of Sheriff Robert Miller, who had volunteered to give away the bride. Stanley Pierce stood at the altar, straight-backed in a fine black suit, his scarred profile to the congregation. When he turned and saw her, the look of wonder that transformed his face made Alicia's step falter. No one had ever looked at her that way before, like she was something precious and valuable. It made the charade all the more painful. The ceremony passed in a blur. Alicia heard herself repeating vows, promising to honor and cherish a man she was actively deceiving. Stanley trembled as he placed a simple gold band on her finger. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Reverend Porter declared. "Mr. Pierce, you may kiss your bride." A moment of panic seized Alicia. This was the first physical contact they would share beyond a handshake. Stanley seemed equally hesitant, leaning forward to place the briefest, most gentle kiss upon her lips. That simple touch, respectful and restrained, sent an unexpected warmth through her body. A reception was held at the Grand Hotel's dining room, the finest establishment in Eagle Ridge. The townspeople welcomed her warmly, though Alicia noticed how some of the women whispered and then stole glances at Stanley's scars, then at her, clearly wondering what kind of woman would agree to marry a man sight unseen. "Mrs. Pierce," Stanley said quietly as they shared the first dance, "I hope you'll find Eagle Ridge satisfactory, though I realize it's quite different from Boston." "I find it charming," she answered truthfully. "And please call me She stopped herself. "Savannah." "And I'm Stanley." They moved across the floor with surprising grace. Despite his injuries, Stanley was an accomplished dancer and led her confidently through the waltz. "Your letters didn't mention you danced so well," Alicia remarked. A shadow crossed his face. "I haven't danced since before the accident." "I didn't think it was relevant information for a potential bride." "What else might I discover about my new husband that was deemed irrelevant?" she asked, attempting to lighten the mood. The corners of his mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "I play chess rather poorly. I read Dickens before bed. And I have a weakness for Mrs. Holloway's apple pies." Alicia found herself smiling genuinely for the first time since arriving in Eagle Ridge. "I shall remember these confessions, especially about the pies." As the evening progressed, Alicia met more townspeople. There was Dr. Martin, a young physician who'd arrived just months before, Mrs. Holloway of the famous pies who ran the town bakery, Mr. Peterson, the schoolteacher from Boulder City who traveled to outlying areas twice monthly, and dozens of miners and their families. "Where will we be living?" Alicia asked as Stanley escorted her from the reception. "I have a house at the edge of town," he replied. "It's nothing extravagant, but comfortable. My housekeeper, Mrs. Cooper, has prepared it for your arrival." The house ended up far more than comfortable. The two-story structure stood on a small hill overlooking Eagle Ridge, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Inside, polished wooden floors gleamed in the lamplight, and well-crafted furniture filled the rooms. A fire crackled welcomingly in the stone hearth of the parlor. "This is lovely." Alicia was genuinely impressed. "Your room is upstairs, the first door on the right," Stanley said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. "I've taken the liberty of having your things brought over from Mrs. Sullivan's. Mrs. Cooper has unpacked for you." "My room?" Alicia asked before she could stop herself. Stanley's expression was difficult to read in the lamplight. "I meant what I said yesterday about expectations. We hardly know each other. I thought separate rooms would be appropriate until we've had time to become better acquainted." Relief and an unexpected twinge of disappointment mingled in Alicia's chest. "That's very considerate. Thank you. I typically leave for the mine early, but I've taken tomorrow off to show you around the property in town, if you'd like." "I'd like that very much," she replied softly. Later, alone in her new bedroom, which featured a beautiful space with a 4-poster bed and lace curtains at the windows, Alicia removed Savannah's wedding ring and stared at it. The weight of her deception felt heavier with each passing hour. Stanley was not the cold businessman she had expected. He was considerate, thoughtful, and far more vulnerable than his exterior suggested. She had planned to stay just long enough to save money for a ticket to California. Now, lying in the comfortable bed of a man she had married under false pretenses, Alicia wondered how she would ever find the courage to tell him the truth, or leave when the time came. The following weeks settled into a rhythm Alicia had never expected to find comfortable. Each morning, Stanley departed for the mine after a quiet breakfast together, during which they began to learn about each other in small, careful conversations. "Have you always wanted to be a mine owner?" she asked one morning over coffee and Mrs. Cooper's excellent biscuits. Stanley considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness. "No, actually. I studied engineering at Columbia University. I came west intending to work for the railroad, but my uncle left me a stake in the Silver Lady when he passed. I discovered I had a knack for finding promising veins." "Is that unusual?" Alicia asked, genuinely curious. Some call it luck. I prefer to think of it as applied geology and observation. A ghost of a grin touched his lips. The Silver Lady has been good to this town. It provides over 100 jobs now. Alicia was learning that beneath Stanley's reserved exterior was a man who took his responsibilities to his workers and the town seriously. He paid fair wages when other mine owners cut corners and maintained safer conditions than the law required. He also quietly funded improvements around Eagle Ridge, from the small health clinic to a new roof for the church. For her part, Elisha was careful about her backstory, sharing only details she knew from Elizabeth's letters and keeping conversation focused on the present whenever possible. The guilt of her deception weighed on her constantly, especially when Stanley showed her kindness she knew she didn't deserve. She busied herself learning to manage the household from Mrs. Cooper, a stern but fair-minded widow who had worked for Stanley since before his accident. She explored Eagle Ridge, making acquaintances and gradually finding her place in the community. One afternoon, 2 weeks after the wedding, Alicia visited the general store run by Walter and Martha Green. "Mrs. Pierce, what a pleasure," Martha greeted her warmly. "How are you settling in?" "Very well, thank you," Alicia replied, examining a bolt of blue cotton fabric. "I'm thinking of making new curtains for the kitchen." "You sew?" Martha looked impressed. "My mother taught me. She is—" Alicia stopped herself before mentioning that her mother had been in service. "She believes every woman should have practical skills." "We need more of that thinking around here." Walter Green chimed in from where he was stocking shelves. These mining families, especially the children, could use someone with refined skills and education. "The children?" Alicia asked. Martha looked sad. "Most of them get little schooling. Mr. Peterson from Boulder City comes twice a month, but it's hardly enough. Some of the older boys can barely write their names before they're following their fathers into the mine." Alicia thought of her own brief time as a teacher's assistant before becoming a companion to Boston's social elite. "That's a terrible shame." "Stanley mentioned you had teaching experience?" Martha said. Alicia froze. She had never discussed teaching with Stanley, but Savannah had mentioned working briefly as a schoolteacher in her letters. "Just a little," she managed. "Nothing formal?" "It's still more than anyone else here has," Walter said. "Several parents have been hoping someone might start regular lessons, even informally. The mining company has that empty building near the assay office that would make a fine schoolroom." The idea took root in Elisha's mind. Teaching would give her purpose during her time in Eagle Ridge, and might help ease her conscience about the deception she was perpetrating. She wouldn't expect to be paid, but she might earn a bit, and it might eventually be enough to go to California when the time came. That evening she broached the subject with Stanley as they sat in the parlor after dinner, she with her needlework and he reviewing ledgers from the mine. "I was thinking about the children in town," she began. Stanley looked up, his attention immediately engaged. "What about them?" "They have so little opportunity for education, with Mr. Peterson coming only twice monthly. I was wondering if I might, that is, if you would object to me organizing some regular lessons?" Stanley set his ledgers aside, studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "You want to teach the children of Eagle Ridge?" "If there's interest from the families, it would be nothing elaborate. Just reading, writing, arithmetic, and perhaps some history." "And where would you hold these lessons?" he asked, his expression unreadable. The Greens mentioned an empty building near the assay office. "Owned by the mining company," Stanley finished for her. "I think it's an excellent idea, Savannah." The use of Savannah's name sent a pang through Alicia's heart, but she pushed it aside. "You do?" "This town needs more than silver to thrive. It needs a future for its children." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I'll have the building cleaned and furnished with whatever you need. Make a list." Alicia was momentarily speechless at his enthusiasm. "Thank you. I didn't expect such immediate support." "Why not?" he asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I don't know," she admitted. "I suppose I'm still learning who you are." Something vulnerable flickered in his eyes. "As am I with you." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken thoughts. Finally, Stanley cleared his throat and stood. "It's getting late. I should let you rest." He bid her good night with the formal courtesy he always maintained, but as he reached the doorway, he paused. "Savannah?" "Yes?" "I'm glad you came to Eagle Ridge." After he left, Alicia sat motionless, tears burning. Every kind word and every gesture of support only served to expand her guilt. And now, with the school project, She was establishing roots in a community she had planned to abandon. Worse still, she was beginning to care for Stanley Pierce, a man who believed he had married someone else entirely. The makeshift school opened 3 weeks later in the refurbished building near the assay office. Stanley had spared no expense providing proper desks, a chalkboard, books, slates, and all the supplies Elisha requested. Word spread through town, and on the first day 15 children between the ages of 6 and 14 arrived with varying degrees of enthusiasm and trepidation. Elisha discovered she had a genuine talent for teaching. She organized the children by ability rather than age, created engaging lessons, and found ways to connect with even the most reluctant learners. By the end of the first week, attendance had grown to 22 children, and several mothers had approached her about adult reading lessons in the evenings. "You've created quite a stir in town," Stanley remarked one evening as they walked home together after he'd helped her prepare the next day's lessons. It had become their new routine. He came to the schoolhouse after finishing at the mine and helped her clean up and organize for the following day. "Is that good or bad?" Elisha asked, noting how comfortably they now walked together. "Definitely good. I've never seen Tommy sit still for anything before, and Mrs. O'Malley says he's been reading to his little sisters at night." Elisha smiled, picturing the rambunctious 10-year-old who had initially declared school worse than church. "He has a quick mind. He just needed to discover books that interested him." "You have a gift," Stanley said, his voice warm with admiration. "The children adore you." "I enjoy teaching them," she replied honestly, "though I worry about what will happen when Mr. Peterson returns next week. I don't want to step on any toes." "I received a letter from him yesterday," Stanley said. "He's accepted a permanent position in Denver and won't be returning. I took the liberty of writing to the county superintendent about officially establishing our school with you as the teacher, if you're amenable." Elisha stopped walking, stunned by the implication. A permanent teaching position would mean staying in Eagle Ridge indefinitely. It was something that directly contradicted her original plan to leave once she had enough money. I don't know what to say," she managed. Stanley misread her hesitation. "Of course, if teaching full-time doesn't appeal to you, we can search for someone else. I should have consulted you first." "No, it's not that," she assured him quickly. "Teaching does appeal to me. Very much so. I just hadn't thought about making it a permanent arrangement." His expression became guarded. "Are you unhappy in Eagle Ridge?" "No." The vehemence of her response took them both by surprise. "No," she repeated more softly. "I'm not unhappy at all." It was the truth, she realized with startling clarity. Despite the circumstances that had brought her here and the lies she maintained, Elisha had found more purpose and acceptance in Eagle Ridge than she'd ever known in Boston. "I'm glad," Stanley said simply, though his face conveyed much more. As they continued walking, their conversation turned to plans for the school, but Alicia's mind was in turmoil. Each day that passed made her deception more entrenched and the eventual revelation more devastating. Yet the thought of leaving Eagle Ridge, leaving Stanley, had become increasingly painful to contemplate. That night, Elisha lay awake long after retiring to her room. 3 doors down the hall, Stanley slept in his separate bedroom, maintaining the respectful distance he had established since their wedding. Though they had grown closer through their shared interest in the school and increasingly comfortable conversations over meals, he had never presumed upon their arrangement or pressed for a more intimate relationship. Elisha had come to admire him profoundly. She admired his quiet strength, intelligence, and dedication to his workers in the town. She'd noticed how he visited injured minors personally, how he remembered the names of every child in her school, and how his scarred face softened when he thought no one was watching as he observed her teaching. With a start, Elisha realized she was falling in love with her husband, a husband who had married a woman named Savannah Elliott, not Elisha Prescott, a husband who deserved far better than the web of lies she had woven. The next morning, Elisha woke determined to tell Stanley the truth, whatever the consequences. She would do it that evening, after school, when they would have privacy and time to talk. But fate had other plans. When she arrived at the schoolhouse, she found an unexpected visitor waiting for her. It was Dr. Martin, and he looked concerned. "Mrs. Pierce, I was hoping to catch you before the children arrived," he said, removing his hat. "There's been an accident at the mine." Alicia's emotion seized. "Stanley?" No, he's fine," Dr. Martin assured her quickly. "It's 2 of the men from the lower shaft. It's nothing life-threatening, but they'll need care. I've set up at the clinic, but my nurse, Mrs. Powell, is down with influenza and can't assist me. I wondered if you might be able to help after school." Relief that Stanley was unharmed washed through her, followed by concern for the injured miners. Of course, I'll come as soon as I dismiss the children for the day. The day passed in a blur of lessons and worried thoughts. When Alicia finally reached the small clinic at 4 o'clock, she found it bustling with activity. Stanley was there, his coat discarded and shirt sleeves rolled up, helping Dr. Martin tend to a miner with a badly broken leg. "Savannah," he said when he saw her, relief evident in his voice. "Thank you for coming." "How can I help?" she asked, already removing her shawl. For the next several hours, Alicia assisted Dr. Martin, drawing on the skills she had learned while caring for her ailing father years before. She cleaned wounds, prepared bandages, and offered comfort to the injured men and their worried families. Stanley worked alongside her, his calm presence reassuring to his men. It was past 9 when they finally left the clinic, both exhausted but satisfied that the miners were stable and comfortable. "You were remarkable today," Stanley said as they walked home through the quiet streets. "Where did you learn such capable nursing?" The simple question presented an opportunity for truth. "My father was ill for many years before he died. I helped care for him." "I'm sorry," Stanley said softly. "You never mentioned that in your letters." Alicia swallowed hard and knew that now was the time to tell him the truth. "There's a great deal I haven't told you, Stanley." He stopped walking, turning to face her in the moonlight. "Savannah?" The name was a knife to her heart. "That's just it," she whispered. "I'm not—" "Stanley, Mrs. Pierce," Walter Green's voice called from behind them. They turned to see the storekeeper hurrying toward them, waving an envelope. "A telegram came for you, Mrs. Pierce. A rider just brought it from the junction station." Alicia accepted the envelope, trembling. Who would send her a telegram? No one knew she was here under the name of Savannah Elliott. Unless... She tore it open, and as she read the brief message, all color drained from her face. Arriving in Eagle Ridge on Thursday to visit? Mr. Elliott. Savannah's father was coming to Eagle Ridge in 2 days. "Is it bad news?" Stanley asked with concern, obviously noting Alicia's pallor. She refolded the telegram. "Alicia's father is coming to Eagle Ridge, Thursday." "I didn't realize he was still living," Stanley said. "You never mentioned him." I've never met him," Alicia explained, mind racing. This was the moment everything would unravel. Savannah's father would arrive, discover his daughter had died, and was buried in the local cemetery, which would expose Alicia as an imposter. "Are you unwell?" Stanley asked, genuine concern in his voice. "You look faint." "I'm just tired," she managed. "It's been a long day." They walked the rest of the way home in silence, Alicia desperately calculating her options. She could run. She could pack her things tonight and be gone before dawn, or she could finally tell Stanley the truth and face the consequences. When they reached the house, Stanley lit the lamps in the parlor while Alicia stood frozen in the doorway, the telegram held tightly. "Sit down," he said gently, guiding her to the sofa. "I'll get you some tea." "No," she said, finding her voice at last. "I don't need any tea. We need to talk, Stanley." Something in her tone made him study her face intently. He sat beside her, leaving a respectful distance between them. "I'm listening." Alicia took a moment to reply. "I haven't been honest with you about who I am." The words hung in the air between them. Stanley remained silent, waiting. "My name isn't Savannah Elliott," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's Elisha Prescott." Stanley looked at her in confusion for a moment. Then understanding seemed to dawn. "The friend you said died on the journey?" Alicia had tears threatening. "Savannah was the one who died. From consumption, just as I said. But she was your intended bride, not me." "You assumed her identity?" Stanley stated, his voice carefully neutral. "Yes." The confession felt both terrible and liberating. "I was desperate. I'd fled Boston in disgrace with barely enough money for the journey. When Savannah died, I saw an opportunity to buy time, to earn enough money to continue west." "What disgrace drove you from Boston?" His question was direct but not accusatory. "My employer, Frederick Harrington, attempted to force himself on me in his library. When I rejected him, he claimed I had tried to seduce him. In Boston society, his word was law." "Why not simply deny it? Surely there were those who would believe you." "My widowed mother works as his housekeeper. If I had fought the accusation, he would have dismissed her as well. We would have had nothing." Alicia wiped away a tear. "So I accepted the blame and fled." Stanley was silent for a time. And your plan was to come here, pretend to be Savannah, and marry me, and then what? I planned to save up some money and then head to California. Put so baldly, the scheme sounded even more heartless than it had felt. Yes. I'm so sorry, Stanley. I never intended to hurt anyone. I planned to be gone within a few weeks. I didn't know what to do. What changed? He asked quietly. The question caught her off guard. What? It's been nearly 2 months. Alicia, he said, using her real name for the first time. You've established a school. You've integrated yourself into the community. Why haven't you left? The truth rose to her lips before she could stop it. Because I found something here I never expected. And what was that? A place where I belong, she whispered. People who value me for my contributions, not my social standing. And she hesitated, then finished with what was in her heart. You. Stanley stood abruptly and walked to the fireplace, bracing against the mantel. His back was to her, and his shoulders were tense. I understand if you want me to leave immediately, Alicia said into the silence, or if you wish to have me arrested for fraud. What I did was unforgivable. Is that what you think of me? He asked, turning to face her. That I would have you arrested? I don't know what to think, she admitted. I've been living a lie for so long. Stanley's expression was troubled. I knew something wasn't right, from the beginning. Alicia stared at him. You knew? Not specifically, but there were inconsistencies. Small things you said that didn't match the letters. Sometimes your reaction when I called you Savannah was off. He shook his head. I told myself I was being paranoid, that my appearance had made me overly suspicious of a woman willing to marry me sight unseen. Guilt crashed over Elisha anew. Your appearance has nothing to do with this. You must believe that. Then why maintain the deception for so long? Why establish the school if you plan to leave? Because I started to care, she admitted, rising to stand before him. About the children, the town, you. I know I have no right to ask for forgiveness, but I'm truly sorry, Stanley. He studied her face. What do you propose to do about Mr. Elliot? The question was so practical, so unexpected, that Alicia blinked in confusion. I don't know. When he arrives and discovers what I've done, he'll expect to find his daughter. Instead, he'll find her grave and a woman who has been using her identity. Stanley's tone remained even. It could go very badly for you. Yes, and it could also go badly for you, Alicia corrected quietly. Your reputation would suffer because of my lies. Stanley gestured this away. My reputation has endured worse. I'm more concerned about the school. The children need you, Alicia. His use of her real name again made her feel constrained. What are you saying? I'm saying we need to decide how to handle this situation, together. Together? Hope flickered faintly in her chest. You're not asking me to leave? Stanley's expression softened. Is that what you want? To leave Eagle Ridge? No, she answered without hesitation. No, it isn't. Then, if that's the case, we have until Thursday to determine how to approach Mr. Elliot. But first... Yes? I believe I have my own confession to make. Stanley gestured for her to sit again, then took the chair opposite her. You're not the only one who came to this marriage with secrets, Alicia. Alicia sat perfectly still, watching Stanley struggle to find his words. The lamplight cast half his face in shadow, making his scars less visible while illuminating the troubled expression on his face. The accident that caused these, he gestured to his scars, wasn't entirely an accident. What do you mean? Alicia asked softly. Stanley's gaze was fixed on the bookshelf, but Alicia knew he wasn't seeing the books that were displayed. 3 years ago, we were expanding the main shaft of the Silver Lady. I'd found promising signs of a new vein, and we were pushing to reach it before winter. He paused, his jaw working. My foreman, William Abernathy, warned me the timber supports needed reinforcement before we proceeded, but I was impatient. I was concerned about investors and deadlines. I ordered the work to continue. Alicia began to understand. The supports failed. Stanley looked grim. During a dynamite blast, the explosion was contained, but the resulting cave-in trapped 5 men, including me. The fire started when a lamp overturned. He touched his scarred cheek unconsciously. I managed to help 3 men out before a secondary collapse. The last man, Jed Wright, was pinned under debris. I tried to reach him, but... His voice faltered. Alicia fought the urge to go to him, sensing he needed to finish. The flames reached him before I could free him. His screams... Stanley closed his eyes briefly. I still hear them sometimes. "Oh, Stanley," Alicia whispered. The official report called it an unforeseen accident. The miners who survived knew better, but they protected me. Out of loyalty or fear, although I'm not sure which is worse. His voice had grown hoarse. Jed Wright left behind a wife and 3 children. I've provided for them financially, but money doesn't bring back a husband and father. "Is that why you keep your distance from the townspeople?" Alicia asked. "Because you blame yourself?" "Wouldn't you?" The question was rhetorical, tinged with a hint of bitterness. These scars are a fitting reminder of my arrogance. The real reason I sought a mail-order bride wasn't just because of my appearance. It was because no woman who knew the truth would have me. The revelation settled between them. Alicia considered his words carefully before responding. "We've both built our lives here on deception," she said finally. "Me, pretending to be someone I'm not. You, allowing others to believe you were simply a victim of the accident rather than partly responsible for it." "And Savannah," Stanley added. "What do you mean?" Alicia asked, trying to figure out what her friend had done. "Savannah had to have known she was sick with consumption. I am familiar enough with the disease to know that it doesn't just appear. She never told me that she was sick," Stanley said. Alicia could see that he was troubled by this idea, although he didn't seem upset. She thought for a moment. "You're right? I never thought of it that way, although I don't think she knew how sick she was." Stanley's expression was grave. "It seems we're well matched in our secrets, if nothing else." She always spoke about the adventure that she couldn't have while living in Boston. Alicia paused. Savannah grew up in a well-to-do home and often spoke of wanting something more. Their eyes met across the space between them, a new understanding forming. They were both flawed, both hiding from their pasts, and both seeking acceptance in their own ways. "What do we do now?" Alicia asked. Stanley considered the question. "First, we need to address the immediate problem of Mr. Elliot. If he discovers you've been impersonating his daughter..." "He could have me arrested," Alicia finished, "or he could expose the truth to everyone." "Which would mean losing the school and your place here?" Stanley added. "I don't want that to happen." The simple statement warmed something in Alicia's chest. "Nor do I." Stanley began pacing, his engineering mind clearly working through the problem. What if we tell him a partial truth? That Savannah died on the journey, and you, as her friend, came to inform me personally of her passing. "But how would we explain my remaining here?" "Our marriage?" Alicia asked. "We could say we developed feelings during your extended stay and decided to marry." Stanley paused. "It's not entirely false." Alicia's thoughts caught at the implication. "No, it's not," she agreed softly. "He'll still wonder why you used her name at first," Stanley pointed out. Alicia thought for a moment. "What if we say I used her ticket and papers to continue the journey after she passed, intending only to deliver the news personally, and there was confusion when I arrived? That, by the time it was sorted out, we had already begun to care for each other." "It could work," said Stanley, "especially if we present a united front." "Do you think he'll believe us?" Alicia asked. "Perhaps, especially if the entire town corroborates that you're Alicia Prescott, not Savannah Elliott." Stanley's lips quirked. "Eagle Ridge protects its own. Even someone who arrived under false pretenses?" "You've earned your place here, Alicia. The school, your kindness to the miners' families, and the way you've embraced this community. Those things are real, whatever name you've been using." His words filled her with both gratitude and shame. "I don't deserve such understanding." Stanley stood before her. After a moment's hesitation, he extended his hand. Alicia placed hers in his, and he drew her gently to her feet. "Perhaps neither of us deserves understanding," he said quietly, "but we might deserve a second chance." For a breathless moment, Alicia thought he might kiss her, but instead he released her hand. "It's getting late. We should rest. Tomorrow we'll need to inform a few key people of our plan. Dr. Martin, Reverend Porter, and the Greens to start with. People whose support we'll need." Alicia was disappointed yet relieved. They had taken a significant step tonight, but there remained much to resolve, and there was a small part of her that wanted to experience his kiss. "Good night, Alicia," Stanley said, her true name sounding right on his lips. Good night, Stanley. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Alicia felt lighter despite the challenges ahead. For the first time since arriving in Eagle Ridge, she had spoken her own name and revealed her true self. And she had been accepted, not rejected. Whatever happened with Mr. Elliot, she would face it as Alicia Prescott Pierce, no longer a counterfeit bride, but a woman seeking an honest future. The next day passed in a flurry of careful conversations. Stanley and Alicia spoke with Reverend Porter first, explaining enough of the situation to secure his understanding and support. The kindly minister was initially shocked but ultimately compassionate. The Lord works in mysterious ways, he said after hearing their story. Perhaps this deception, wrong as it was in its inception, was the path that brought you both to where you needed to be. Dr. Martin was equally understanding, particularly when Alicia explained her situation in Boston. Predatory men in positions of power are, sadly, all too common, he said grimly. You did what you felt necessary to survive, Mrs. Pierce. Or should I call you Alicia now? Alicia, please, she replied, relieved by his reaction. The Greens, Sheriff Miller, and Mrs. Sullivan were also brought into their confidence. By evening, a small circle of Eagle Ridge's most respected citizens knew the truth and had agreed to support the couple's story when Mr. Elliot arrived. Remember, Stanley reminded Alicia as they walked home from their last meeting, as far as anyone else knows, you've always been Alicia Prescott. Savannah Elliott was your dear friend who died en route to Eagle Ridge. We met when you came to deliver the sad news, and one thing led to another. And my teaching credentials? Alicia asked practically. You were a teacher's assistant and private governess in Boston, Stanley. That's close enough to the truth to be believable, and different enough from Savannah's experience to avoid confusion. Alicia was quite impressed by his attention to detail. You would have made an excellent criminal mastermind, she joked weakly. I prefer to think of it as problem-solving, he replied with a hint of the dry humor she'd come to appreciate, an engineer's approach to a social dilemma. That night, Alicia slept fitfully, dreaming of accusing faces and pointing fingers. She woke before dawn, exhausted but unable to fall back asleep. Donning her robe, she made her way quietly downstairs, hoping a cup of tea might calm her nerves. To her surprise, Stanley was already in the kitchen, stoking the stove. You're up early, she said, pausing in the doorway. He looked up, shadows under his eyes suggesting his night had been no more restful than hers. I could say the same for you. I couldn't sleep, she admitted. Nor I. He gestured to the kettle. Would you like some tea? Yes, please. They moved around each other in the kitchen with domestic familiarity that belied their still evolving relationship. When the tea was ready, they sat at the small kitchen table rather than moving to the more formal dining room. Are you afraid? Stanley asked after they'd been sitting in silence for several minutes. Alicia considered the question honestly. Yes, but not just about Mr. Elliot. What else? I'm afraid of what happens after, she confessed. If he accepts our explanation, if the town continues to accept me as Alicia Pierce rather than the counterfeit Savannah Elliott, what then? For us, I mean. Stanley cradled his cup between his palms, gazing at the steaming liquid. What would you want to happen? The question hung between them, laden with possibility. Alicia paused for a moment. I'd want to stay, she said simply. I'd like to continue teaching and make a real life here. She hesitated, then added softly, with you. Stanley's gaze lifted to meet hers, and there was vulnerability and hope warring in his expression. As my wife in name only, or... No, Alicia interrupted gently. Not in name only. The corners of his mouth lifted. Even with these? He gestured to his scars. I stopped seeing your scars weeks ago, Stanley, she said truthfully. I see the man who created a school for children who had none, who visits every injured miner personally, who reads Dickens before bed and dances surprisingly well. A genuine grin spread across his face, transforming his features, and I see a woman of remarkable courage and compassion who created a new life from nothing and touched every person she's met here. Scars or no scars, Alicia, you're the most beautiful woman I've ever known. Alicia felt tears spring up at his words. Impulsively, she reached across the table and laid her hand over his. His fingers turned to intertwine with hers, warm and strong. Whatever happens today, Stanley said, holding her gaze, know that I don't regret marrying you, regardless of the circumstances that brought us together. Nor do I, she whispered. The moment was interrupted by a knock at the front door. They exchanged a startled glance since it was barely 7 in the morning. "Stay here," Stanley said, rising to answer it. Alicia heard murmured voices in the entryway. Then Stanley returned, his expression grave. "It's Sheriff Miller," he explained. "The morning train arrived early. Mr. Elliot is at the hotel." Alicia's emotions began to reveal themselves. "He is here now, but we thought we had until afternoon at least. Apparently he left on an earlier connection." Stanley squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "He's asked to meet with us at 10 o'clock at the hotel dining room." "The hotel is so public," Alicia murmured, imagining the scene if Mr. Elliot reacted badly. "That might work in our favor," Stanley pointed out. "He's less likely to make a scene in public, and Sheriff Miller has already arranged for Reverend Porter and Dr. Martin to happen by during our meeting." Alicia was grateful for his foresight and the support of their friends. "I should dress," she said, rising on shaky legs, "and prepare myself." Stanley touched her as she passed. "Alicia," he said softly, "whatever happens, we face it together." The simple promise gave her strength she hadn't known she possessed. "Together," she agreed. 3 hours later, they entered the Grand Hotel dining room, Alicia's hand tucked securely in the crook of Stanley's arm. Across the room, a distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and Savannah's blue eyes sat at a corner table. He stood as they approached, his expression guarded. "Mr. Elliot, I'm Stanley Pierce. This is my wife, Alicia." "Your wife?" Mr. Elliot repeated, his gaze fixed on Alicia's face. "How very interesting, considering I came to visit my daughter. Where is she?" Alicia swallowed hard, feeling Stanley's steady presence beside her. "Mr. Elliot, I'm afraid that I have bad news. I was traveling with Savannah as her companion, and... What happened?" "Where is Savannah?" Mr. Elliot asked. Alicia felt tears coming as she prepared to deliver the painful news. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Elliot. Savannah passed away during our journey west from consumption." Mr. Elliot sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. "Dead? My Savannah is dead?" "I'm truly sorry for your loss," Stanley said quietly. "Alicia brought the news to me personally, which is how we met." The older man looked between them, confusion and grief warring on his face. But the telegram, it was signed Elliot. "There was some confusion when Alicia first arrived," Stanley explained. "In her grief and exhaustion after the journey, some people mistakenly believed she was Savannah. By the time matters were clarified, we had begun to form an attachment. Savannah is buried in the church cemetery," Alicia added gently. "I made sure she received a proper Christian burial. Reverend Porter conducted the service." As if on cue, Reverend Porter approached their table. "Mr. Elliot, I thought that might be you. I'm Reverend Porter. Please accept my condolences on the loss of your daughter. She rests peacefully in our churchyard." Mr. Elliot looked increasingly bewildered. "This makes no sense. What are you talking about? I received letters from Savannah after she arrived here." Alicia and Stanley exchanged a quick glance. Alicia wondered if Mr. Elliot was in shock and having a hard time accepting the news that his daughter was gone. "What letters?" Alicia asked carefully. "I received 2 letters from Savannah describing her arrival and marriage." Mr. Elliot reached into his coat and withdrew an envelope. "This arrived just 3 weeks ago." He gave the letter to Alicia, who opened it trembling. Inside was a letter in handwriting that she didn't recognize. The signature at the bottom read, "Your loving daughter, Savannah." "I don't understand," Alicia murmured, genuinely confused. Mr. Elliot studied her reaction. If Savannah didn't write these letters, who did? And why? The question hung in the air like a thundercloud. Alicia carefully reread the letter, noting specific details about Eagle Ridge and the wedding that only someone local could have known. "May I?" Stanley asked, taking hold of the letter and scanning it. "This appears to be Mrs. Sullivan's handwriting." "The boarding house proprietor?" Alicia asked, pieces beginning to fall into place. "But why would she write to me pretending to be Savannah when she is obviously buried in the cemetery?" Mr. Elliot finished, anger beginning to replace his confusion. Stanley glanced around the dining room, noting several interested onlookers. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation somewhere more private. My office at the mine is nearby." Mr. Elliot reluctantly agreed, and the 3 made their way through town to the Silver Lady's administrative building. Once settled in Stanley's comfortable office, Alicia looked around at everybody, then suddenly made a decision. "Mr. Elliot, I need to tell you the complete truth," she said, ignoring Stanley's warning glance. When Savannah died on the train, I was in a desperate situation. Over the next half hour, Elisha explained everything. She described her flight from Boston, Savannah's death, her initial deception, and how she had planned to leave but found herself increasingly drawn to both Stanley and the community. I never intended to maintain the deception permanently, she finished, and I certainly never wrote to you pretending to be Savannah. I've carried the guilt of my actions every day. Mr. Elliot listened silently, his expression impossible to read. When she finished, he turned to Stanley. And you, sir? When did you discover this deception? Only recently, Stanley admitted, but in learning Elisha's true identity, I also shared my own secret. Briefly, he explained his role in the mine accident, his guilt, and how it had shaped his life since. So you're both frauds, Mr. Elliot said bluntly. We're both flawed, both guilty of our share of mistakes, Stanley said softly. But somehow, we've found a chance at happiness together. Mr. Elliot fell silent, considering their words. Savannah always spoke highly of you in her letters, Miss Prescott. Or should I say, Mrs. Pierce. She considered you her dearest friend. She was mine as well, Elisha said sincerely. I would never have dishonored her memory deliberately. Perhaps not, Mr. Elliot conceded, but these letters remain unexplained. If neither of you sent them... A knock at the door interrupted them. Sheriff Miller entered, accompanied by Mrs. Sullivan, who looked distinctly uncomfortable. I found Mrs. Sullivan trying to book passage on the afternoon stage, the sheriff explained, and thought she might have something to contribute to your conversation. Mrs. Sullivan was acting like a nervous wreck. I can explain. The letters to Mr. Elliot? Stanley asked, holding up the evidence. The older woman's shoulders slumped. Yes, I wrote them. But why? Elisha asked, genuinely bewildered. For the school, Mrs. Sullivan blurted. After you started teaching, I heard Mr. Pierce inquiring about making it official, but you needed proper credentials, which meant verification from family or previous employers. Understanding dawned on Elisha. So you wrote to Mr. Elliot. To establish your background, Mrs. Sullivan finished miserably. I thought if her father confirmed Savannah had teaching experience, the county superintendent wouldn't question your qualifications. You forged letters from my dead daughter? Mr. Elliot asked incredulously. I didn't know she was dead, Mrs. Sullivan protested. Not at first. When Mrs. Pierce, Elisha, arrived, she said her friend Elisha had died. I assumed she was Savannah. But later, after I began using my real name around town, Elisha pressed. Mrs. Sullivan looked sheepish. I overheard you and Mr. Pierce talking one night when I brought over that apple pie. You were discussing your concern about teaching credentials. I thought I was helping. By committing mail fraud, Sheriff Miller pointed out dryly. The children needed a teacher, Mrs. Sullivan said defensively. Elisha is the best thing to happen to this town in years. The simple statement hung in the air. Mr. Elliot looked between the faces surrounding him and then rubbed his face as if he was trying to figure out what the next step should be. It seems, he said finally, that my daughter's friend has made quite an impression on Eagle Ridge. She has, Stanley confirmed without hesitation. Mr. Elliot nodded. Savannah always was an excellent judge of character. If she considered you her dearest friend, you must possess qualities worth knowing. I do regret deceiving you, Elisha said sincerely. Savannah spoke of you with great affection. Did she suffer, at the end? Mr. Elliot asked, vulnerability showing through his stern exterior. She went peacefully, in her sleep, Elisha assured him. I was with her. Her last words were of hope for her new life here. She wasn't afraid. Tears glistened on the older man's face, which he quickly blinked away. I would like to see her grave. Of course, Stanley said, Reverend Porter can take you there whenever you wish. As for these, Mr. Elliot gestured to the forged letters, I believe that's a matter between Mrs. Sullivan and the sheriff. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. Given the circumstances and Mrs. Sullivan's otherwise spotless reputation in the community, I think a stern warning might suffice, provided she writes to the county superintendent explaining the misunderstanding. I'll do it straight away, Mrs. Sullivan agreed quickly. And my wife's teaching position? Stanley asked. I'll speak to the superintendent myself, Mr. Elliot said unexpectedly. My daughter was indeed a trained teacher, though Elisha here was not. But if she's half as dedicated as Savannah was, the children of Eagle Ridge are fortunate. Thank you, Alicia whispered, hardly believing his generosity. Don't thank me yet, Mr. Elliot cautioned. There is something else you need to be aware of. Alicia felt the blood drain from her face. What do you mean? There has been talk around Boston that Mr. Harrington is trying to find you. Now you should know that I never liked the man. There was always something unsavory about him, but he is actively looking for you. Are you aware of why Alicia needed to leave Boston so quickly? Stanley asked. I have not heard of the circumstances, no, Mr. Elliot admitted. Mr. Harrington tried to take advantage of me, and then his wife heard of the event. He accused me of trying to seduce him, Alicia said, doing her best to keep her tears at bay. This entire situation seemed to be spiraling out of control. Alicia was protecting her mother, who works in Mr. Harrington's household, Stanley said, moving to stand beside her. She took the blame for something that wasn't her fault, so that her mother could keep her position. Mr. Elliot studied them both. Perhaps you should write to your mother, Alicia, and invite her to visit her newly married daughter. Hope blossomed in Alicia's chest. She had never even thought of this option. You won't tell Mr. Harrington where I am? Of course not, Mr. Elliot said cryptically. In fact, I believe I'll stay in Eagle Ridge for a few days and visit my daughter's grave, and perhaps visit the school I've heard so much about. After Mr. Elliot and the others departed, Alicia sank into a chair in Stanley's office, emotionally drained. I can't believe he isn't going to expose me. He has every right to do so. He's a father grieving his daughter, Stanley said, kneeling beside her chair, but I think he sees in you a connection to her, and perhaps he recognizes, as I do, that you've built something meaningful here worth protecting. Alicia reached out to gently touch his scarred cheek. We both have. Stanley turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. It was the first such intimate gesture between them. Come, he said, rising and offering his hand. Let's go home. For the first time, the word home held its true meaning for Alicia. Not just a house, but a place where she belonged, with a man who saw her, the real her, and valued what he saw. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, no longer hiding behind masks of deception, but standing in the light of truth. Scars, flaws, and all. The following few days passed in a blur of emotional revelations. Mr. Elliot visited Savannah's grave, spending a long private hour there, while Elisha waited respectfully at a distance. Afterward, they walked together through the town. Mr. Elliot asked questions about Savannah's final days, and Alicia answered them as gently and honestly as she could. She spoke of you often, Alicia told him as they paused by the creek that gave the town its name. She was excited about starting a new life, but she missed her father terribly. After her mother died, it was just the two of us, Mr. Elliot said, watching the water flow over smooth stones. I never understood why she felt she needed to leave Boston. She wanted adventure, Alicia recalled with sadness, and she believed in Stanley from his letters, his vision for Eagle Ridge and his integrity. She was right about that much, at least, Mr. Elliot conceded. He seems to be a decent man, despite his mistakes. He is, Alicia confirmed softly. We both came to this marriage wounded and hiding our true selves. Finding our way to honesty has been transformative. Mr. Elliot studied her face. You love him? It wasn't a question, but Alicia answered anyway. Yes, though we're still learning what that means for us. To her surprise, Mr. Elliot approved. Savannah would be pleased, I think. She always said you deserved happiness after all you'd sacrificed for your mother. The mention of her mother brought a pang of longing. I miss her terribly, but writing to her feels dangerous with Mr. Harrington possibly intercepting mail. Leave Frederick Harrington to me, Mr. Elliot said with surprising firmness. I've known men like him my entire career. They only understand one language: leverage. Before Alicia could question him further, they were interrupted by several children from the school, eager to show Miss Alicia the project they'd been working on during her absence. You should go with them, Mr. Elliot encouraged, seeing her hesitation. I'd like to observe this school I've heard so much about. The impromptu school session held in the town square that afternoon revealed to Mr. Elliot what the rest of Eagle Ridge already knew. Alicia was a gifted teacher who connected with each child individually, nurturing not just their minds but their spirits. She had the rowdy sons of miners sitting quietly to hear the conclusion of Treasure Island, and had the shy daughter of the baker confidently demonstrating multiplication on a portable slate. As the children dispersed at the end of the lesson, Mr. Elliot approached Alicia with newfound respect. Savannah would have been an excellent teacher, he said, but I think you match her natural ability. These children are fortunate indeed. Thank you, Elisha replied, touched by his words. Teaching them has become the great joy of my life here. One of the great joys, I think, Mr. Elliot corrected with a meaningful glance toward Stanley, who was approaching from the direction of the mine. That evening, Mr. Elliot dined with Elisha and Stanley at their home. The conversation flowed more easily than Elisha had dared hope, ranging from the mine's operations to literature to Mr. Elliot's shipping business in Boston. I've made a decision, Mr. Elliot announced over coffee in the parlor afterward. I've drafted a letter to Mrs. Prescott, informing her of her daughter's marriage and inviting her to visit Eagle Ridge at my expense. Elisha nearly dropped her cup. You've what? Your mother deserves to know you're safe and happy, Mr. Elliot said matter-of-factly, and I suspect she misses you as much as you miss her. But Mr. Harrington? I have recently heard that he has found himself in a rather uncomfortable position regarding some questionable business practices, Mr. Elliot interrupted. I've called in several favors from associates on the Boston Exchange. Frederick won't be concerning himself with his household staff for quite some time. Stanley leaned forward, intrigued. You've been busy during your stay, sir. I protect those my daughter loved, Mr. Elliot said simply. Savannah would have wanted her friend's mother safe from that man's retribution. Tears filled Alicia's eyes. I don't know how to thank you. Just be happy, Mr. Elliot replied. Build the life my daughter never had the chance to live. That's thanks enough. The next morning, Mr. Elliot departed on the eastbound train, carrying with him a lock of Savannah's hair that Alicia had preserved, and letters to both Mrs. Prescott and the county superintendent regarding Elisha's teaching position. He's a remarkable man, Stanley observed as they watched the train pull away. I understand now where Savannah got her generous spirit. I never expected forgiveness, Elisha admitted as they walked back through town. From him or from you. Stanley took her hand, a gesture that still thrilled her with its casual intimacy. Perhaps we were both due for unexpected grace. That evening, for the first time since their wedding, they dined by candlelight, the formality between them dissolving as they reflected on the trials they had weathered together. When Stanley escorted Elisha to the foot of the stairs afterward, he paused, something new in his expression. Elisha, he said softly, when I asked you to marry me, or rather, when I asked Savannah to marry me, I had resigned myself to a marriage of convenience, a practical arrangement between two people who might at best develop a friendly affection. And now? Now I find myself hoping for much more. He took both her hands in his. These past months have shown me what it means to truly know someone. Not just the face they present to the world, but their greatest fears, their regrets, their courage. I've seen you at your most vulnerable and your most magnificent. As I have you, she whispered. I didn't believe I could love or be loved after the accident, Stanley continued. I thought these scars defined me, as surely as your past in Boston defined you. We were both wrong, Elisha said, reaching up to trace the line of his scars gently. These are just marks of the journey that brought you to me. Stanley reached for her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. I love you, Elisha Pierce. Not as the woman I thought I married, but as the woman you truly are. Brave, compassionate, and real. And I love you, she replied, tears of joy brimming, not despite your scars, but including them. Every part of you, the hero and the flawed man. When he kissed her, it was nothing like the brief, formal touch of their wedding day. This was a kiss born of genuine love and newfound trust. It was tender at first, but flourished with months of restrained desire. Stay with me tonight, Stanley murmured against her lips, not as my counterfeit bride, but as my true wife. Alicia's answer was to take his hand and lead him up the stairs, and to their shared future. Spring arrived in Eagle Ridge with a riot of wildflowers transforming the mountainsides. The Silver Lady mine continued to prosper under Stanley's careful management, and the school, which was now officially recognized by the county, had expanded to include evening classes for adults eager to improve their reading and arithmetic. Elisha stood on the platform of the train station, smoothing her best blue dress nervously as Stanley checked his pocket watch for the third time in 10 minutes. The train is only 5 minutes late, he reassured her, slipping the watch back into his vest pocket. Your mother will be here soon. What if she doesn't like Eagle Ridge? Elisha fretted. Or what if she's angry that I let her believe I was headed to California all these months? Stanley took her fidgeting fingers in his. She raised a daughter strong enough to forge a new life from nothing. I suspect she's made of equally resilient stuff. As if on cue, the train whistle sounded in the distance. It had been 4 months since Alicia had seen her mother. 4 months of deception, discovery, and finally, redemption. The train pulled into the station in a cloud of steam and smoke. Passengers began disembarking, and then there she was, Margaret Prescott, looking more rested and elegant than Alicia had seen her in years. She wore a new traveling suit and scanned the platform anxiously. "Mother," Alicia called, waving. Margaret's face lit up at the sight of her daughter. She hurried forward, dropping her handbag to embrace Alicia tightly. "My darling girl," she breathed, "let me look at you." She held Alicia at arm's length, examining her face with a mother's knowing eye. "You're happy," she declared, sounding surprised. "Truly happy." "I am," Alicia confirmed, wiping away joyful tears. "Mother, this is my husband, Stanley Pierce." Stanley stepped forward, extending his hand. "Mrs. Prescott, welcome to Eagle Ridge. It's an honor to meet you at last." If Margaret was startled by his scarred appearance, she gave no sign of it. Instead, she clasped his hand warmly between both of hers. "The honor is mine, Mr. Pierce. Your letters and Mr. Elliott's account have told me much about the man who won my daughter's heart." "All good, I hope," Stanley replied with a smile that came more easily now that he no longer hid from the world or himself. "Exceedingly good," Margaret assured him. "Though I admit I'm still trying to understand how my daughter, bound for California as a lady's companion, ended up a teacher and mine owner's wife in Colorado." "It's a rather long story," Alicia admitted as Stanley collected Margaret's trunk. "One best told over tea at home." "Home," Margaret repeated, linking her arm through her daughter's. "I like the sound of that." The reunion tea stretched into dinner as Alicia and Stanley related the full story of their unconventional beginning. They spoke of Savannah's untimely death, Alicia's deception, Stanley's secrets, and their eventual journey to honesty and love. "So you see," Alicia concluded, "I may not be proud of how it started, but I wouldn't change where it brought us." Margaret was silent for a moment, absorbing everything she had heard. "When I received Mr. Elliott's letter explaining that you'd married and settled here, I hardly knew what to think. My practical, cautious daughter, suddenly a frontierswoman woman with a husband she'd never mentioned?" "I'm sorry for worrying you," Alicia said contritely. "Don't be," Margaret surprised her by saying. "All those years in Boston, doing what was expected and being proper and careful. Where did it get us? You, blamed for a predator's actions. Me, still scrubbing floors at 50. "Mother," Alicia was shocked by her frankness. Margaret waved away her daughter's concern. "Mr. Elliott has been remarkably kind. He not only arranged my journey here, but secured me a position as housekeeper for a respectable widow in Newport, should I choose to return east." "You don't have to go back," Stanley said, exchanging a glance with Alicia. "We've discussed it, and we'd be honored if you'd consider making your home here with us. The house has plenty of room. And the school could use another teacher for the youngest children," Alicia added eagerly. "You were a governess before you married Father. Your experience would be invaluable." Margaret looked between them, clearly touched by the offer. "You've given me much to think about. But for now, I'd like to see this school I've heard so much about, and perhaps this famous silver mine as well." The following weeks were filled with joy as Margaret was warmly welcomed into the Eagle Ridge community. She proved to be a natural with the youngest students, and many of the miners' wives sought her advice on household matters, impressed by her years of service in a fine Boston home. One evening in late May, Alicia found Stanley on the front porch, watching as Margaret taught several of the miners' children how to make daisy chains in the front garden. "Your mother is a remarkable woman," he observed as Alicia settled beside him on the porch swing. "The children adore her." "Like mother, like daughter," Alicia replied, leaning her head against his shoulder. "I received a letter from the county superintendent today. Our school has been allocated funds for a proper building to be constructed this summer." "That's wonderful news," Stanley said, slipping his arm around her waist, "though I suspect we'll need to expand again before long." "Oh, why is that?" Stanley's scarred cheek creased in a smile as he placed his free hand gently over her stomach. "Just a feeling I have." "How did you know? I only confirmed it with Dr. Martin yesterday." "You've been radiant for weeks," Stanley said simply, "and you've been falling asleep over your books every evening. I didn't want to presume, but I hoped." "You're going to be a father," Alicia confirmed, covering his hand with hers, "in about 7 months." The joy that transformed Stanley's face was something Alicia knew she would remember for the rest of her days. He pulled her close, kissing her with a tenderness that still took her breath away. "I never imagined such happiness. he murmured against her hair. Not after the accident, not after everything I'd done. Nor I, Alicia admitted. When I stepped off that train pretending to be Savannah, I thought I was just buying time until I could escape again. Instead, I found home. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Alicia marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From desperate deception to profound truth, from counterfeit bride to beloved wife and soon-to-be mother, she had found her place in the world. Not through pretense, but through the courage to finally be herself, scars and all. In the distance, the Silver Lady Mine stood as a testament to both tragedy and redemption. And beside her, Stanley Pierce, the man who had married a stranger but learned to love the woman beneath the disguise. He held her close as they watched the first evening stars appear above Eagle Ridge. "No more hiding," he whispered, kissing her temple. "No more hiding," Alicia agreed, turning in his arms to kiss him properly, there on the porch for anyone passing by to see. "Only truth between us from now until forever."